I'd like to open my very brief remarks with some thanks. First of all, to Easternational and Marco Marrazzi in particular, the president of Easternational. We have cooperated very well with Easternational in this initiative. It's the first time we cooperate with Easternational. We hope it will not be the last. There will be more of these initiatives. Second, I'd like to thank some of our speakers, of course, all the panelists, but in particular, President Gentiloni. Paolo Gentiloni has been actively involved in the Belt and Road Initiative when he was foreign minister, but also in his capacity of prime minister. By the way, he participated, one of the few European leaders who participated in the summit held in Beijing in May 2017. I'd like to thank Ambassador Li Ruyu, Ambassador to the People's Republic of China, for his participation, for having accepted our invitation. He will provide us with some remarks on the state of advancement of the initiative after the summit in May and the prospect of the initiative. And I'd also like to thank Deputy Minister Michele Geraci. He will be with us later in the morning. Deputy Minister in the Ministry of Economic Development. He has lived and worked in Shanghai for quite some time, speaks fluently Chinese, and among other things, he has created an ad hoc task force in the ministry to coordinate relations with China. I'd like to reassure you, this is not certainly the first and not even the last of the numerous conferences held on the Belt and Road. We do not pretend to cover all the spectrum of the possible implications of the initiatives. We are very well aware of the importance of the initiative in economic terms. We know that through an improvement in connectivity, both by land and by sea, the initiative is meant to stimulate trade, economic growth, and investment. We know that at this very juncture, there are something like 65 countries concerned, which represent over 30% of the global GDP and 62% of the world population. We're also very well aware of the political implications of the initiative, which is one of the main features of the external projection of the People's Republic of China. We know how much China has invested, not only in financial terms, by the way, through the creation of two distinct financial institutions, the Asia Infrastructure Development Bank and the Silk Road Fund. We also know how much China is investing in the initiative as a means to increase and improve the projection of China, particularly in Asia, but also in Southeast Asia in particular, but also in the Middle East, in the Gulf, in North Africa, but also probably in the whole of Africa, and finally, last but not least, in Europe. So we also know that reactions to the initiative have been differentiated. Some countries have enthusiastically agreed to participate, to be involved in the initiative. Others are more reluctant. I'm speaking in particular of the countries of Asia. But today we will focus on two more modest, if I may say so, tasks. Modest is quote unquote. First is to assess the progresses achieved by the initiative since the summit of May 2017. What has been realized, what is in the pipe, what should we expect in the short and medium term? And second, which is probably the most important focus of today's conference, is the reaction in Europe towards the initiative. How is Europe reacting? And there again, we have noted that the reaction are differentiated. Some countries are apparently very much interested and already participating actively in the implementation of the initiatives. Others, probably because of geography, as easy as that. I think maybe our panelists will tell us more about that, are less interested or more reluctant to get involved. To my knowledge, but maybe the panelists will tell us more about that, I am not aware of a common EU position with respect to the Belt and Road Initiative. As I said, some countries are more than others involved and others are less, and this is probably one of the reasons why there is not yet been an officially expressed common position of the European Union on the Belt and Road. And I think, if I may, just a few remarks before leaving the floor to the panelists, that we should keep in mind a few principles that could probably help us in guiding our position as Europeans towards the initiative. First, I think that the initiative should be implemented in a spirit of openness and cooperation. It goes without saying. This means that governments concerned should be involved in the actual implementation, in the definition of the projects, but also companies should be involved, hopefully on an equal footing. It should also be implemented in a spirit of transparency and reciprocal advantage. If, of course, one of the main objectives of the strategy is to increase trade, it should be both ways, trade from China, but also trade from Europe to China, which is probably a bit more complicated, as the first tests tend to show us. And I think that in that respect, we should be very careful in avoiding that the initiative interfere with some of the negotiations that we are having with China. I have in mind in particular the negotiations on the investment agreement, which is a very complicated negotiations, by the way. Hopefully in the future, this is not for today or for tomorrow, it should not interfere also with negotiations that I hope that sometime will start on a trade agreement, on a free trade agreement. Another very controversial issue. But I think this should be kept in mind, knowing this is something also we should be reminded that we have some issues that are need to be resolved in relations between the European Union and China. Market economy status, a number of tariff and non-tariff barriers, and excessively restricted access to the Chinese market for our companies. So there is a lot that can be done and hopefully will be done to improve the situation. And finally, I think the one point is that the initiative should be implemented in a spirit of inclusiveness and should be not perceived as a unilateral Chinese strategy, but as a cooperative effort by China and the other states concerned to stimulate development, growth, trade through better connectivity. I stop here because I don't want to interfere with the proceeding, and I leave the floor to Marco Marazzi, president of Easternational, also co-organizer of this conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Ferdinando. I will just spend a few words about why we did this conference and why we invited so many guests from other European countries. The European approach to Belt and Road Initiative, for me, it's essential. When I lived in China, I was, for a period of time, vice chair of the European Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai. European Chamber of Commerce is one of the best Chamber of Commerce of the EU outside Europe. It's one of the most powerful and is one of the better organized. And I think it was very important for me to understand how actually the negotiating power that EU puts at the table when negotiating with China cannot possibly be achieved by any single country within the EU, not even Germany. So, and that's why I said, Belt and Road Initiative is an interesting project. We have been studying it since 2 or 3 years. My Easternational has been set up just to analyze the Belt and Road Initiative impact, not only on the Italian economy, but also on Europe as a whole. So I said, so that's why we would like to take this European approach, and we have guests from France, from Poland, which is a very important country. We have, for the Belt and Road Initiative, we have guests from Greece. Everybody knows, the Pireo port is a major part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And we have a guest from UK, who actually is a very prominent scholar at the London School of Economics, who has been writing about this topic for a long time. So we would like to hear from them. And then, of course, we will have a session at the end which will talk about Belt and Road Initiative and Italy, because we are in Italy, so we have to address this. Few messages I would like to give. I think what Mr. Neriferosi is saying is right. The approach to the Belt and Road Initiative so far has been mainly on a country-by-country basis. China is discussing with single countries in the EU whether to sign the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding for Cooperation. Why? Because a cooperation on Belt and Road Initiative involves some matters like infrastructure investment, like direct investment, which are not exclusive competence of the EU. If it were only a trade agreement, the states will be excluded from this type of negotiation. We'll only do it through the EU. But Belt and Road Initiative is a comprehensive project, and it goes beyond the competence of the EU. So that's why each country is actually having its own dialogue, most of them, with China on this topic. There is also the 16+1, which is an association of EU members from the Eastern Europe, essentially, and also non-EU members from Eastern Europe who have created a dialogue with China since 2012 called 16+1. And this dialogue has been having meetings every year, and the last two meetings have been focusing mainly on the Belt and Road Initiative. So everything is good. Whatever brings business opportunities, whatever brings opportunities for investments by European companies is good, or by Chinese companies, joint venture, everything is fine. My only concern is that by taking a country-by-country approach, we may not gain all the benefit from this project. Now, the EU has not been standing still. I mean, they have tried to create a European approach. There is the EU-China connectivity platform, which was created a few years ago, which aims to coordinate the infrastructure projects that China is undertaking in parts of Europe, like the Belgrade to Budapest high-speed line, but also in other places. And because it is very important to make sure that this infrastructure project don't conflict with the TEN-T, with the strategic infrastructure guidelines that Europe is giving itself on the priorities. And also, it's talking to China on public procurement. It's a very big issue, public procurement. Because, when you are in the EU, when projects are done in the EU, they need to follow public procurement policies of the EU. The other encouraging sign that EU is active on this is the China-EU Investment Cooperation Fund, which was just announced recently at the summit, is going to be a fund created between the European Investment Fund, the one responsible for the Juncker plan, and the Silk Road Fund. So, and this fund would be actually investing in projects, in co-investing in some of the projects. I have a dream one day that this fund could actually co-invest in Africa, for instance. I don't think that's part of the aim. But anyway, so again, there's a lot of things to discuss today. I will just say a few words to thank again Mr. Gentiloni for attending. Mr. Gentiloni was one of the the only leader from the G7 present at the Belt and Road Summit. Ambassador Liu, old friend, and so I would actually leave the floor to Mr. Gentiloni first for his keynote speech, and then to Mr. Liu for some remarks. And then we will move to the actual sessions on specific countries. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, good morning. Many thanks to EI and Easternational, dear Ambassador, Excellencies. It's a pleasure for me to be here in this meeting. It is also an opportunity to remember the importance of the summit. I understand it was 500 days ago in China about the Belt and Road Initiative in this beautiful Yankee Lake location. I think this summit was one, perhaps recently, the stronger demonstration of the ambition of the economic and geopolitical project of the Chinese leadership. The hospitality was very nice, especially for us, for Italy. I still remember the gala dinner with someone singing O Sole Mio. The attending was impressive. I think 25, 30 head of state and government were there. Some of them also Europeans. I think 3 EU head of governments, probably Mariano Rajoy, Alexis Tsipras, and Viktor Orban, if I remember well, and maybe also Alexander Vucic, but he is not yet in the EU. I think this summit underlined 2 things. One, the importance of the project of the Belt and Road Initiative for China. It is by large the strongest international commitment of the Chinese leadership for the next years. And second, the fact that this commitment of the Chinese leadership has large potentiality among international actors and international players. I'm very interested to understand better, and I'll be informed of your discussion on the dynamics of this relation with the EU, because in fact, in this summit we had a very strong representation of European countries. Apart from leaders and head of state and government, we had there several foreign ministers. For sure it was UK, France, I don't remember if the German foreign minister was there. But what Ambassador Nelly was saying about the perhaps the lack of a clear framework in the EU in respect to the Belt and Road Initiative is relevant. Obviously, the plan, the Belt and Road Initiative, is now, first of all, an enormous investment plan. Apart from the changement of figures, because figures go from 76 to billion dollars to 1 trillion, and it depends on the timing, on the frame, on the leverage, on many things. But this is not, I think, the real point. The real point is that perhaps it is the largest investment plan and the largest investment opportunity now in the world. And so I think that it is interesting for every single country, apart from the geographical and historical links that you can or cannot have to this ancient Silk Road. And we, the Italians, have a lot of connections from this point of view. But apart from this, I think it is an issue that nobody can ignore in this moment. It is this large investment plan is based on the idea of connectivity First of all, connectivity on infrastructures, and first of all, connectivity through Asia towards the Indian Ocean. But then this road continues to reach Southern Europe, and from Southern Europe, from Greece, from Italy, to reach the rest of Europe. This is the maritime road, as you know. Then we have the railway road, and we have in recent times the new polar road discussed, especially between China and Russia, and other players very interested in the region, in the polar region. Obviously, connectivity linked to investment is part of a large geopolitical game. I think that this is the second point that we have to be clear. One is the large investment plan, the enormous opportunity that this large investment plan creates for countries that have an economic, geographical, historical interest in this. But second is to be aware of the fact that there is behind this, normally, a geopolitical interest from China. We are in Rome, by the way, and we know the connection between roads and geopolitical influence since more than 2,000 years. So it would be, I think, not only naive, but useless to ignore the fact that this program has also a geopolitical clear impact. Is it a Marshall Plan, as someone is discussing now in the international debate? Is it a gateway to the globe? I don't know. I don't know. You can use the definition that you like better. I don't think that we can compare it with the Marshall Plan. I think things are very different. It is for sure a second step after a first step, more limited to the financial dimension, that was the creation. It is not a Chinese institution, but it was the creation of the Asia Infrastructure and Investment Bank. You remember a couple, two or 3 years ago, when this initiative was launched, it was very controversial. At the beginning, it was not clear if the Western countries, how many Western countries would participate to the AIIB. At the end of the day, I think that probably all European EU countries are participating to the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank. We, the Italians, are the third EU investor in this bank. The Belt and Road Initiative is obviously a second step, and his strength is not comparable to the Asian Investment and Infrastructure Bank. But the logic, I think, is similar. It is the strength of a historical great country, as China is in his region, first of all, and the projection of this strength through economic, financial, and investment means in the world. I think ignoring this would be useless, so we have to take this challenge and discuss the opportunities, the advantages, the conditions of the challenge without any ideological hostility, because it would be silly to have any ideological hostility, from my point of view, to this kind of initiative. The geopolitical impact will be obviously also controversial first of all in Asia, towards some Asian players, India in first place. And as we saw after the change of leadership in Malaysia, this dynamic in Asia is also directly connected to the Belt and Road Initiative. As you know, the new old Malaysian leadership is rediscussing the conditions, the terms of the agreements the former Malaysian government had with about the Belt and Road Initiative. Final remarks, our country, Italy. I think opportunity and challenges are there also for Italy. I would say particularly for Italy, because it is clear that history and our traditional 50-year-long, almost 50-year-long relation with China are there, showing the importance that we have to give to this opportunity. Because of historical reasons, because of geographical reasons, because of economic reasons, and because of the importance we give to the relation, bilateral relation between Italy and China. I think that Italian ports, there is, as always in Italy, a discussion among them on the subject, but Italian ports in general, I don't want to raise domestic issues, are ideal terminals for the maritime Belt and Road Initiative. I don't think that there is an alternative between Piraeus and the Italian ports. It's a long road with different steps. And by the way, we are interested also in the dynamics going on in Greece. If we consider the fact that recently we had an agreement through which our railways are working with the Greek railways, and so the connections of the port to the rest of Europe are something interesting also for our country and our railways. But in any case, I don't think that if you look to the map of Europe, you understand very well that Athens and Trieste have different location and different potential connection with the rest of Europe. So big opportunities for us. Also, I think, more difficult towards joint investment in other countries, Italy and China. We have some experience going on, Mozambique, for example. We had many discussions with the Chinese leadership in recent years on the subject, and we have many plans. But to be honest, these plans are not yet sufficiently developed. So I think we have to make a stronger effort, because we are very interested both on potential common initiatives in Africa. I remember the recent conference in China with African countries, and also in Asia. We are interested in common investment in Asia. And this brings me to my final remark, that the challenge is there for Italy and for Europe, not only the opportunity. And what is the challenge? I repeat, I don't think that the challenge is an ideological one. The Chinese hegemony, China is there, and geopolitics is old as China or as Rome is. The challenge are economic. The economic rules, the terms of trade, the reciprocity in the terms of trade, the reciprocity in investments. And this is the issue that personally I deem still open. It is not clear how much we will go towards this kind of potential reciprocity. I will be very clear, it cannot be only a one-way initiative with Chinese investments and other opportunities. We need common investments and we need fair and free trade. This is the formula, the magic formula, not always clear, but fair and free trade. So this will be our commitment. I am convinced that this commitment would be made easier by a common EU attitude on the subject. We are not waiting EU as a country. We cannot do this we cannot wait EU on migration, we cannot wait EU on several issues, and we cannot wait EU also in this. But as in migration, also in this more limited dossier, a common EU frame would be very, very important. And so I'm happy if this will be the core of your discussion this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gentiloni. Yesterday, when we were having dinner with the speakers, talking about the Italian ports, Mr. Nali Feroci came up with an idea, say maybe...
Don't say this.
No. Anyway, we'll talk about it later.
It's confidential. It's going to be the headlines of the conference.
It's going to be the headlines of the conference. We'll talk about it later. But anyway, I will give the floor to Mr. Liu Ruiyu. Liu Ruiyu is the ambassador of China in Italy. He's been ambassador for 5 years already?
Almost.
Almost 5 years. Okay. Mr. Li, maybe you can tell us more also what is the status of the Belt and Road Initiative after this summit, the 500 days.
Honorable President, Mr. Gentiloni, Mr. Feroci, Mr. Frazzi, thank you very much to organize this event, and I'm very pleased to take part in this forum involving the Belt and Road Initiative, its development, achievements, and the prospect in the future. I believe this is a topic of practical and long-term significance. Hence, I would like to discuss and share with you some of my views. It is well known that this year we celebrate the 5th anniversary of the launch by our President, Mr. Xi Jinping, of the initiative aiming at joint building the Silk Road Economic Belt and 21st Century Maritime Silk Road. Throughout the history, 5 years are only a flash, but during the very short 5 years, the Belt and Road Initiative, as an important platform of international cooperation, received positive response within the international community and received support and also encouragement from ever-increasing number of countries. Jointly building the Belt and Road has become the Chinese proposal and an important international public product for the participation of China to global openness and cooperation. For the improvement of the global economic governance system, for the promotion of shared prosperity and development worldwide, and for the creation of a community of shared future for mankind. During these 5 years of practice, the building of the Belt and Road has evolved from an idea, a vision, to real actions, and has achieved important results. I would mention some of them. Now, a better mutual trust and world international consensus on this initiative. During the last 5 years, the concept of Belt and Road Initiative and the principle of achieving shared growth throughout discussion and collaboration have entered vocabulary of the international community, being included in the documents resulting from the most important international mechanisms such as the UN General Assembly, G20, APEC, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, etc. At the end of August this year, 103 countries and international organizations have already signed 118 cooperation agreements with China concerning the Belt and Road Initiative. Second, openness and inclusive and stronger synergy between the development strategies of the countries involved. So far, the Belt and Road has implemented policy and planning matching between different countries' development strategies, such as Russia's Euro-Asian Economic Union, ASEM's General Planning for International Connection and Intercommunications, Turkey's Middle Corridor Project, Mongolia's Development Road, Vietnam's 2 corridors, 1 economic circle, UK's England North Economic Center, Saudi Arabia's 2030 vision, etc. Third, focus on projects obtaining multi-project early harvest. In the last 5 years, the overall trade between China and the countries along the Belt and Road amounted to more than 5,000 billion US dollars, making China the greatest trading partner for at least 25 countries along the Belt and Road. Chinese direct investment in these countries exceeded 70 billion US dollars and created more than 244,000 jobs. China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, China-Laos Railway, China-Thailand Railway, Hungary-Serbia Railway, high-speed railway in Indonesia are all under construction and progressing. Guarda Port, Piraeus Port, and other port projects have been continuously deepened. At the end of August this year, the China Rail Express has concluded more than 10,000 journeys reaching 50 European countries and 43 cities. Actually, we also have an express train of transportation to a city close to Milan. Last year, we successfully held the first Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation in Beijing. Prime Minister Gentiloni attended that conference and he spoke about this just minutes ago. The forum presented 279 projects at that time. Now we have witnessed 265 of them have been concluded and entered the operational stage with an implementation rate of over 95%. Fourth, deepening friendship and promoting people-to-people bonds. China and the countries on Belt and Road have started important operation patterns in the fields such as culture, education, science, and technology, setting down important cooperation plans for specific sectors. Throughout the implementation of the Silk Road Scholarship Program, for example, China has started training young talents in the countries along the Silk Road. In 2017, 300,000 foreign students from those countries arrived in China to study, while there are 60,000 Chinese students reaching the countries along the Belt and Road. We estimate that by 2020, travelers among those countries will be that of more than 85 million, spending nearly 110 billion US dollars. Dear friends and ladies and gentlemen, objectively speaking, the cooperation under China's Belt Road Initiative is something completely new that needs everyone to participate, to progress, to grow among challenges, and innovate while developing. We are very glad to see that many countries around the Belt and Road have started to share the results of its construction, and we are positive that all the parties will try to submit their constructive advices. We are also aware that some people always have their stereotypes on certain topics. Lately, as you may know, some media created news and reports describing the Belt and Road as a death trap for some countries. So I would like to share with you some of the points. First, the Belt Road is based on the approach of government-led, with companies as main player and market-driven. And all the projects within the initiative should pass the evaluation and approval of all the stakeholders so as to guarantee their economic and social value. Actually, China has turned down some of the offers by some countries to invest heavily in their country because we have to look after the situation and also financial burden. So finally, we turned down the projects. Secondly, all the investments within the Belt and Road are profit-driven, and all the loans are provided according to the specific situation of each receiving country, so as to avoid the rising of their debt risks and the financial burdens. Thirdly, the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank is a key financial partner of the Belt and Road Initiative. With its 87 member countries, the AIIB finances projects strictly abiding to the most upgraded international standards, thus protecting the legitimate interests of all parties. Actually, this year I met Chairman Jing. He came to Italy and had a number of discussions with the officials here, and he mentioned to me that the response were very positive for the decisions they've made to invest. And I asked him whether it's economically profitable. He said, yes, of course. Yeah. So it performs actually very well. By promoting the joint building of the Belt and Road, we hope to strengthen the interconnection among different countries and to improve and complete the global supply chain, value chain, industrial chain, so that any country can share their own strengths and better participate to global division of labor. This could be profitable for each country, allowing them to develop themselves and at the same time helping the growth of the world economy. We can responsibly say that Belt and Road cooperation projects are effective investments for all the shareholders and could become positive assets for all the countries involved, able to promote national economic growth and improve the people's livelihood. The cooperation projects are definitely not a death trap, as some people describe it. Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, currently the world is in a phase of great change we haven't seen in 100 years, an era of great historical transformation, development, and great adjustments. We are witnessing an increase of uncertainties and instabilities, and a rise of trends of unilateralism, trade protectionism, and populism. Economic globalization is facing backsets, and global governance is facing new challenges. In front of this event, ever in changing, complex international situation, President Xi Jinping not long ago, during the Sino-African Cooperation Forum Summit held in Beijing, stressed that China will firmly believe peace and development to be the pillars of our era and the mission of our time. China has undertaken this mission and made it its own aim to giving a great contribution to the renovation of humankind. China is willing to build Belt and Road together with its partners and to inject new life force into joint development. China will actively take part to global governance and firmly support openness. Looking to the future, the cooperation under the Belt and Road will provide many new opportunities for mutual benefit to all the countries of the world, including Italy. I believe that China and Italy should continue to work on the following points. First, building mutual political trust, improving strategic matching. Both parties should have a close practical communication, continuing to respect and protect common interests and reinforcing the political ground for bilateral cooperation. As Prime Minister said, the relations between China and Italy is on a very solid ground. We have maintained high-level contacts frequently. Last year, the President and Prime Minister visited China and held very good talks with our leaders. They agreed that we have to work together to improve our bilateral cooperation. And what we describe, work towards the 50th anniversary of our bilateral cooperation. And I think Italy could make full use of the very good relations with China to have even more cooperation in the area of economic cooperation. Some of my colleagues, especially Italian colleagues, told me that there's a sort of a monument in China with more than 100 historical figures who are making contribution to the civilization of China. There are only two foreigners. They are both Italian. Really? Yeah, of course, Marco Polo and Martin Ricci. And Italian friends told me that if it is for other countries, they will make full use of this close cooperation. So they hoped that Italy would have even better relations with China. We're a little shy. We attach great importance to our relations with China, and we believe that Italy is always our best friends among the EU countries, and we also looking forward to work together and closely with the new government to improve our cooperation. Prime Minister and other gentlemen have mentioned cooperation in the area of ports. I believe there will be great opportunities as well. I met many Italian friends, explained to me how important the cooperation in these areas could be. And they even mentioned to me that geographical speaking, the port facilities, etc., especially in the northern part of China, is very advantageous concerning the route, because any ship coming out of Suez Canal could directly go to the port in northern part of China that is already in the hinterland. Yes, Italy, hinterland in Europe, and it would save 4 or 5 days of journey by passing other way to Germany and Netherlands. And I mentioned this to the people in China and also my government, but I think that government only can sort of open the door or the gate to each other and to share the sort of common ground for that. But what I believe firmly that the entrepreneurs the people in the port areas should have make their decisions and do more. I suggested that perhaps the port facilities in Italy should have a roadshow, possibly to China, to sort of identify the advantages of those ports, the facilities there, and also the sort of what they could offer to the Chinese companies who are willing to have the cooperation there. But it is still not materialized yet. And during this summer, I also went to some of the big companies with port projects and also spoke to them about the facilities in northern part of China, the ports in northern part of China. And they said, well, if Italian companies approach us, we'll give positive response. So it seems to me that both entrepreneurs from both sides are waiting for the sort of the actions of the other side. I think for the government, perhaps we can try to provide a sort of a platform and try to persuade companies from both sides to meet at least, so that they could discuss and to explore the future cooperation in this area. And we also need jointly implement the consensus our leaders have reached on deepening Sino-Italian relations and sign as soon as possible a Belt Road Cooperation Memorandum. Well, actually, the draft has been ready from the Italian side, and they presented to the Chinese side. I hope that after the National Day holiday period, they could seriously discuss and then give the response to the Italian side. We also need to foster the role of our dialogue mechanisms, such as the China-Italy Intergovernmental Commission. I hope the 8th or 9th meeting, I think this year, would be convened in Italy soon. And the Sino-Italian Mixed Committee on Trade and Economy, and to actively implementing the Sino-Italian 4-year action plan for cooperation. In this plan, we identified 7 areas of cooperation, which Italy has its advantages, and which China hope to develop in these areas for the further reform and development in the future. Under the we need to also to increase the degree of cooperation under the Belt Road framework in different areas such as economy and trade, investment, and infrastructure. Lately, during the Vice Premier's visit to China, the 2 countries signed a memorandum of understanding for exploring cooperation in third parties' market. This is an important occasion to build a new cooperation platform for China and Italy, and to steady promoting cooperation even in third-party markets. We discussed this for a number of occasions, but still we believe that this should be involved with entrepreneurs. We have already had some cooperation in this area. For example, some projects in Mozambique and also some projects in Israel. Some of the companies from the Chinese side and the Italian side, they subcontracted some of the parts of the big projects. We hope that this could be expanding in the future. Third, we hope to strengthen international cooperation and protection multilateral openness. We are ready to increase our communication and the coordination with Italy within main international fora such as United Nations and G20, on the most important topics such as global economic governance, multilateralism, and the 2030 agenda for sustainable development, so as to protect global peaceful and stable development. Facing the no protectionist trend, China and Italy should stand on the same side promoting trade promoting trade, promoting liberalization and simplification to make economic globalization more open, inclusive, and balanced so that its benefits can be shared by all. Fourth, we hope still to strengthen the people-to-people exchanges, because China and Italy are two great Asian countries with long history and splendid cultures. Both highly respect cultural diversity and foster inclusiveness and mutual learning among different civilizations. I hope that both parties will continue to enrich their cultural, scientific, and technological and travel exchanges and enlarge their cooperation range to ties among local communities as well. My experience is that different provinces in China and Italy has many projects, cooperation projects. Some of them we don't even aware of it. Me and also my colleagues in the Foreign Office here in Italy. But we are happy to see that more and more projects are taking place both in China and Italy. I hope that could make Italy-China friendship a model for people-to-people exchanges and the Belt and Road framework. Today, all of our participants are friends of China and strong supporters for Sino-Italian relations. I hope that everyone will join hands to share opportunities, enlarge cooperation, and foster Sino-Italian Belt Road cooperation so that it can reach a new and a great development. Today we also celebrate the 6th anniversary of the founding of People's Republic of China. So let me wish all the best and prosperity and well-being for my country and our people. May China-Italy friendship between our two countries be everlasting. May our bilateral relations thrive and prosper. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, thank you very much, Ambassador Liu Yu, especially for making it today, which is the National Day of China, actually. So it's like our June 2nd. Mr. Gentiloni has to leave, and I would like to thank him again. Thank you very much. Thank you again. Mr. Lee will still with us for a while. May I call then the first panel, which is the Belt and Road Initiative in Europe. May I call Nicola Casarini, Senior Fellow of IAI, François Nicolas, who is Senior Research Fellow and Director Center of Asian Studies for IFRI, the Instituto des Relations Internazionali in Paris, and George Papakonstantinou, who is former Minister of Finance and Minister of Environment of Greece. Io mi vado a sedere e il floor è tuo. Tieni, mi raccomando i tempi. Just logistic announcement. After this session and before the next one, there will be a short coffee break around 11:30, just maybe 10 minutes, maybe around 11:20.
So good morning. We are going to start the session immediately. As was reminded before, we are very happy to have this joint undertaking between the Istituto Affari Internazionali and Easternational on this China's Belt Initiative take assessment, we can call it 500 days after the Beijing Summit, where Italy was well represented by our former Prime Minister Paolo Gentiloni. Now, in the first opening remarks, we heard not only about the Belt and Road Initiative, but also about Europe. And this is the first panel to deal with the Belt and Road Initiative and Europe, what it means for Europe, what are the opportunities, but also the challenges. On 19th September, a few weeks ago, the European Commission and the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Federica Mogherini, presented in Brussels the EU connectivity strategy for Eurasia. Now, this is a joint document produced by both the External Action Service and the Commission, issued as a communication, which could be seen, and some people tend to see it, as Europe's response to the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, if you go to Brussels, people will have different ideas. They will say, this is just a strategy for connectivity in Eurasia. But let's look at the symbolism, why they chose to issue it a couple of weeks ago on the sides of the EU-China connectivity platform, which was mentioned before. Initially, this document, which you can find online, it's like the EU connectivity strategy for Eurasia. Initially, the document was supposed to be presented officially at the next ASEM summit, the Asia-Europe Meeting Summit, to be held in Brussels on the 18th and 19th of October. Since it is Eurasia connectivity, the idea was to present it to Asian partners. But then the decision was made to actually present it a couple of weeks ago on the sides of the EU-China connectivity platform. It may be too much, probably, to say that this is Europe's response to the Belt and Road Initiative, but there's no doubt that the choice of the timing and the situation indicate that for the European Union, when the European Union thinks about connectivity, infrastructure, but also digital connectivity or energy connectivity in the Euro-Asia region, no doubt that the Belt and Road Initiative is the big project which is there, which provides, of course, opportunities, but also some challenges, as you can see by reading the document. And to help us make sense and understand what the Belt and Road Initiative is, what are the main components, and what are the opportunities for Europe, but also the challenges, I'm joined here by two distinguished experts. The first one, Françoise Nicolas, who is a senior research fellow and director at the Center for Asian Studies at the Institut Français des Relations Internationales in Paris. She's an economist, and she has written quite extensively on Chinese Asian affairs and Europe-China, Europe-Asian relations. And she will probably focus more on the Belt and Road Initiative and in the final part of what it means for Europe. And our second distinguished guest is George Papakonstantinou, who is now part-time professor in the School of Transnational Governance at European University Institute in San Domenico di Fiesole in Florence. And so he comes to Italy quite often nowadays to teach and give courses there. But before, in his previous reincarnation, before being like a full-time, or in any case like a professor, he was a former minister of finance in Greece in the period 2009 and 2011. As he was sharing with us yesterday, he was the one who signed the first bailout program between Greece and the creditors, like the Troika. With this distinguished expert, we can probably now have a better opportunity to delve into what it is the Belt and Road Initiative and what are the implications, in particular in a region like the Balkans and Greece, which has attracted the attention and sometimes the concern from Brussels and some of the member states of the European Union. So without further ado, I leave the floor to Françoise Nicolas.
For how long? All right, well, good morning, everybody. And first of all, of course, I would like to thank the organizers for having me here in beautiful Roma with fantastic weather. So thank you for organizing things so well. So it's my pleasure to discuss the Belt and Road, and we heard a number of very nice things about the Belt and Road so far. And as an analyst, I will try to be perhaps a little bit more critical than what has been said so far. That's my job, I guess. So first of all, before I talk about the EU and the possible response to the Belt and Road on the part of the EU, let me perhaps explain a little bit the way I understand the Belt and Road, what the Belt and Road is all about, and how I see it. And perhaps it's not exactly the way everybody sees it. Well, we'll see that. How does that work? Like this? Okay. So a couple of words as a reminder about the Belt and Road. Well, everybody knows that everything started back in 2013 in Kazakhstan. And on this first occasion, only the belt was discussed. And the belt is about connectivity or connecting China to Europe through Eurasia. So this is the belt part. It is the land part of the Belt and Road. Then 1 month later, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in Indonesia, something was added to this belt, and it was the road that was added. The road, counterintuitively, relates to the sea route. It is counterintuitive. I would personally expect the belt to be the maritime part and the road to be the land part. But anyway, that's the way it is. You know, Chinese are always surprising people. And so now we have the Belt and Road at the end of 2013. The major objective, official objective, is about enhancing connectivity. So really, this project is about connecting China to the rest of the world, connecting China through a maritime trajectory, so to speak, or itinerary rather, or connecting China through the Eurasian landmass. So it's really about connectivity, no doubt about that. And of course, as a result of this initial focus on connectivity, in all the analysis, in all the discussions initially, the focus was on hard infrastructure, rails, roads, and maritime transport. But my take is that exclusively focusing on this hard infrastructure is actually missing the point. The objectives of Belt and Road have, first of all, changed over time, but I think that initially, at the very beginning, the Chinese leadership already had something else in mind, even though I must admit that the Belt and Road Initiative at the very beginning was a very fuzzy concept. But it was fuzzy, I would dare to say, on purpose. It is a very Chinese way of approaching things. So the point is to launch a concept, launch an idea, and then eventually put some flesh on the bones. But from day one, I don't think there was any blueprint in the Chinese leadership's heads. They just wanted to enhance its connectivity. They didn't know exactly how they would proceed. And it is only as time went by that they put some flesh on the bones and got a much clearer idea what they had in mind. But anyway, so exclusively focusing on hard infrastructure, I think, is a major mistake. There are some other things, and this Belt and Road concept has changed over time. So let me perhaps explain what I have in mind with this and how I see the shifting objectives of this Belt and Road. The Belt and Road project has constantly evolved over the past 5 years or so. The first form of evolution is geographical evolution. There has been a clear geographical expansion of the Belt and Road Initiative. We were told earlier today that there were initially 65 countries involved. Actually, there was never a very precise list of who these 65 countries actually were. There were, 65 countries were listed, but nobody knew exactly who they were. After 5 years, we have now more than 65 countries. We have more than 100 countries, according to Xi Jinping himself. So there has been a geographic expansion of this Belt and Road Initiative, and actually reading through various Chinese documents about the Belt and Road, all countries are potentially affected by Belt and Road. And one major change is the opening of the Arctic. Arctic is now part of the Belt and Road. The South Pacific is also part of the Belt and Road, et cetera, et cetera. So you have a very clear geographic expansion of this project. Second way or second form of expansion is sectoral expansion. So the project really goes well beyond hard infrastructure. Now, it encompasses a number of other types of activities, the tourist sectors, customs, police, legal sectors, you name it. So you have also sectoral expansion and not only geographical expansion. Behind this sectoral expansion, I think that what you can perceive is also the fact that China is trying to promote intangible cooperation via this Belt and Road. So we also have an attempt to cooperate on standards and more broadly speaking on management of flows, whatever these flows are, flows of goods, flows of data, flows of people, et cetera, et cetera. And this is why the Belt and Road is also about a digital Belt and Road. Okay, so it's not only about hard infrastructure, it's about very much so soft infrastructure. And together with this soft infrastructure, of course, you have norms, standards, even values. The Belt and Road is also seen by China, at least that's the way I understand it, as a vector for internationalizing Chinese priorities. And this is what Chinese leadership has in mind when they talk about policy coordination. So what they are actually doing is trying to align priorities in international cooperation with their own national priorities. So the Belt and Road is also about this kind of things. And it is really in official documents, when there is reference to policy coordination, this is what the Chinese leaders have in mind. Another kind of evolution also of this Belt and Road is that China sees its project as a platform for international interaction, multilateral interaction, bilateral interaction, and so at the end of the day, it is more or less a tool for restructuring global governance. This is really what we will end up with through this Belt and Road. And so even beyond governance, what we see is a new form of globalization. So whether you call it globalization with Chinese characteristics is up to you, but I think that's really what we will be getting at the end of the day through the implementation of the Belt and Road. So that's the way I see the Belt and Road project. So really what matters is that it goes much, much beyond just hard infrastructure. It is much more subtle. It is also more comprehensive. And of course, the response also has to be more comprehensive. You have to have all these various aspects in mind if you want to respond, to react, and to make the best of the Belt and Road, because after all, there are definitely opportunities. So, but of course, on the ground, if you want to look at what has been done in concrete terms, on the ground, you have to first look at the hard infrastructure projects, even though there are some other aspects behind them. So on the ground, what we see is that there are actually very few projects in Western Europe, very few projects. And if you talk to, I don't know exactly, I don't know the specific case of Italy, but if you talk to people in the French government, for instance, there is not a single project related to the Belt and Road in France. Well, France is not the center of the world, although it's debatable, but it's a good example of a case where there is not much to be seen, and I'm afraid that it's also the case in a number of other countries, at least in Western Europe. It is true that very often what China is pushing for as part of this Belt and Road initiative is not necessarily projects in countries, but projects together with European countries. And in particular, what they are pushing are cooperative projects in third countries. That's a big word, cooperation in third countries. And it is something that a country like mine, France, would be extremely interested in. Why not cooperate with the Chinese in Africa? We have the expertise, they have the money, and there are needs in Africa. So let's team up and do something. But what we see, again, is very little. Again, if I stick to my own case, France, there is not one single cooperative project between China and France in Africa, even though it could be, well, a good place for such cooperative projects, but no project so far. And the reason is that there is no agreement on how these projects could be actually implemented. There are some, if you look at the way the development assistance provided by France, we have a special agency for this, and this special agency has very specific ways of doing things. And these ways are not apparently in line with the way Chinese are doing things. And so we cannot agree on how to, well, operationalize projects. So at the end of the day, what we see are no projects in European or basically no projects, at least in Western Europe, in these Western European countries, and no projects in third countries between China and Western European countries. Next to that, what we observe in the rest of the EU, or even broadly speaking, in the rest of Europe, we see, well, first thing, rising activism on the part of China in Central and Eastern European countries. And of course, this is being pushed through the 16+1 organization. So China is really trying to, well, to implement some projects in this part of Europe, perhaps because it's easier, it's more easily accepted, I guess, by the countries in this part of Europe. And there is also rising activism, as far as I can understand, in the southern part of Europe. So there is rising activism on the part of China in the Mediterranean. Interestingly, so far, France has been excluded from this cooperative game. I don't want to know why, but France is apparently not considered as a Mediterranean country in Chinese eyes. This is surprising, but that's the way it is. But we see increasing activism. This may change, and again, this is related to the Belt and Road. We see activism in the port of Marseille, for instance, and there is definite interest in France for that. So things may be changing, and we may be seeing some concrete projects in this part of Europe and this part of France in the very near future. Who knows? But overall, what we observe is some kind of division of Europe with regards to the Belt and Road. I mean, there are definitely different views in Western Europe, Southern Europe, Eastern and Central Europe. Overall, the stance is Western European countries is very cautious. Cautious, I guess, well, most probably because the ways of implementing projects are simply different. So there is no agreement on how things can actually go ahead. So this is why there is cautious. I don't think that it is any sign of a pushback against China. This is not the way I would see it. It's just a difficulty to find a proper way of pushing cooperation. There is definitely more enthusiasm on the part of the Central and Eastern European countries, the reason being that they have more needs. So they are more interested in getting access to funding, I suppose. So this is why there is more positive attitude in this part of Europe. And the same thing, I guess, holds true for Southern European countries, but I guess George will have more to say about that, and maybe he will prove me wrong. But overall, I don't see any sign of real pushback against China. What we see, though, are very clear attempts at pushing for more reciprocity. So I think that the overall stance in Europe is, well, the idea of connectivity is a good idea. So what's behind the Belt and Road, if it is really about enhancing connectivity, this is fine. But connectivity has to go both ways. Connectivity is, as our president said earlier this year when he was in China, the Belt and Road has to be a two-way street. So it has to, if China is really serious about the Belt and Road and about the Belt and Road being a win-win strategy, it has to be win-win, meaning the two sides win and not China wins twice. Okay, that's usually a big joke, but very often this is the way this Belt and Road may be perceived as win-win, is win twice for China. Obviously, this is not the way we see it. So connectivity is perfectly okay. We share this objective. We would be more than happy to be part of cooperative projects. But what we realize is that it's not easy to find the good terms for such cooperative projects. And that's where the difficulty lies. So if I were to provide some recommendation to the EU, I'm not asked to do that, but in case they ask me, this is what I would say. Yes, 2 minutes, that's perfect. I think that what we need is definitely a more coordinated approach. So I'm extremely glad to see that, apparently the EU is moving in this direction with this connectivity strategy for Eurasia. So more coordination on the part of the of EU member countries. There should be more internal discussion about this Belt and Road, and in particular for those countries who are involved in cooperative projects. Well, they should provide their feedback. How are projects being implemented? Are you happy with the projects or not? More exchanges between countries, information sharing, feedback discussion, etc. This is really what is being needed. I'm afraid this is not what is being done so far. I think that we should not, and don't understand my presentation as being, the sign of my being paranoid about China or my wanting to demonize China. That's not it. But we should not be naive. We should be extremely candid about the Chinese project, which is not only about hard infrastructure, it is about a number of other things. It is a comprehensive project, so the response also has to be comprehensive. We have to take all the various dimensions of the Belt and Road into consideration if we want to respond to it and discuss it. And I think that perhaps the best way is to support connectivity projects, because we are definitely interested in such projects. But I don't see necessarily the point of supporting Belt and Road as such. Why, use systematically the Chinese, how can I say that, vocabulary? Why? If Belt and Road is about connectivity, let's, push connectivity, period. But why, accept this Belt and Road terminology systematically? I don't see the point. Because if you do that, then you accept a number of other things that go with it. And this is precisely those other things with which you may not fully agree with. And so my recommendation would be, okay, take the word connectivity in the Belt and Road strategy, push for it, try to enhance joint projects on such a platform, but why use this Chinese terminology? I don't necessarily see the use of doing such a thing. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Françoise, very much for your provocative final remarks, which are always good for discussion, for understanding opportunities and challenges of the Belt and Road Initiative. You mentioned something important like the lack now of physical projects. But let's not forget that the Belt and Road Initiative is not only physical, but also money. In fact, Pirelli became Chinese. When ChemChina bought Pirelli, the majority stake, 25% of the funding for acquiring the majority stake in Pirelli came from the Silk Road Fund, which is one of the funds created, set up, to promote the Belt and Road Initiative, which means that sometimes across Europe, we do not have the physical experience of a big project connected to the Belt and Road Initiative, but we do have many instances, many cases where the Belt and Road is present through the investment, through the money, and that's why the reciprocity element is so important, because there are more and more Chinese investments coming from Europe. It's a bit more difficult for the Europeans to invest in China. That's why also it is an excellent opportunity to hear someone from Greece, because in particular Greece and the Balkans have received both physical infrastructure projects, as in the case of Piraeus, the Greek port of Piraeus, but also more and more soft loans, investments, so Belt and Road money. So thank you again, George, for being here and sharing with us your experience, your opinion on the Belt and Road Initiative from a Greek perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and let me first start by thanking Istituto Affari Internazionali and Easternational for the kind invitation. Let me also say I am not a BRI expert. I am not a China expert. I am, I think, an expert on Greece, and what I will try and do is bring you the experience, the Greek experience with Chinese investment and therefore with BRI, from the ground and sort of try and draw some more general lessons or conclusions which I think will be useful, hopefully, for our discussion. Of course, I would like to start with some more general comments and link with the discussion we've had until now, both in the morning by the Prime Minister and the Ambassador, and also by Françoise before me. We are in a time in which the US is turning inwards, America first, and the EU is trying to find its way post-crisis. So, in terms of grand designs, the Belt and Road Initiative is the only one out there. The rest of us don't have something to compare. It certainly reflects China's new stature and ambitions. It is soft power plus, and it puts the geo back into geopolitics. We tend to forget the importance of geography. Over the summer, I read an extremely interesting book called Prisoners of Geography. I highly recommend it. You tend to see how even today, after all this time and thinking that technology kind of abstracts us from geography, geography is still very much in the game. And to understand the nuts and bolts of the Belt and Road Initiative, we also need to look at it in the broader context of the geopolitics that it necessarily entails. Now, before I go to Greece, one word on the broader region, because Greece is a particular entry point to Europe, but the BRI, of course, affects the Middle East and the entire Mediterranean. Since the turmoil in North Africa, the Gulf states have become a special zone in contrast to other Arab countries. There's a lot of Chinese interest in Egypt, in Algeria, and Morocco, with specific projects there. Turkey is significant in China's approach. And, of course, all this predates the BRI. It's just that the BRI has created a framework, a context, within which we see now individual projects in all these different countries. And, of course, And, of course, before, again, one last slide before we go to Greece, the Balkan Silk Road, meaning the whole of the Balkan Peninsula, of which Greece is the southernmost part, where there is a lot of activity in transports and logistics. Now, why? Well, as an economist, demand and supply. Prices are low in that region, and there's a lot of demand for investment. China is one of the countries that is willing and able to fill a gap which is not filled by others. And therefore, embedding Chinese investment in the economies has become relatively easy, and the political narrative that has come with it is that of a win-win, where the local governments have claimed that opening up to China has been good for both the countries and, of course, for the investors at the same time. So that brings me to Greece. Greece as the gate to Europe. And a central piece of the strategy in its European and Eurasian aspect. The idea of using Greece as a logistics hub for European markets and the Middle East. The word bridgehead has been used a lot for Greece, using it as a bridgehead for the rest of Europe. At its core, the involvement in Greece, and I will speak more specifically about this, is about port infrastructure, investment, and logistics. However, from the initial maritime focus, we now see a spread, a sectoral spread, which is quite interesting, and I will discuss. Piraeus Port has already been mentioned 2 or 3 times. It's interesting to remember that the Chinese investment, the investment by COSCO in the Greek port of Piraeus predates the announcement of the BRI. Remember, the Piraeus port is by far the largest Greek port, is one of the largest in Europe. It is a state-owned company, was a state-owned company, established in 1930, works on concession contracts, and in 2008, the then conservative government agreed to lease half of the container port to COSCO for a 35-year period. A little anecdote here, we were in opposition then and vociferously opposed the investment. We, meaning the party that I was part of and under Prime Minister Papandreou at the time, as government completely shifted our position and supported the project and helped it expand. It happens. Now, the point I want to make here about the opposition at the time is that this was not an opposition to Chinese investment as such. This was an opposition which had to do with the fact that this was a state-owned port with very strong trade unions that were completely against China coming in. So it had to do more with internal politics than with a kind of view of whether Chinese investment should or should not come in. And that's important because it should not be interpreted in a different way. Now, the investment in the port was simply the first step. From the beginning, COSCO had made it quite clear that it wanted a bigger role. Now, needless to say, there were two terminals. The one that was bought by COSCO expanded, its productivity improved, and the volume coming through multiplied. The other part did not. Therefore, when it came time in the Greek program, in one of the Greek programs with the EU, to actually privatize the port, COSCO was interested. And it acquired 51% in 2016. The price was 280 million, with the Greek privatization fund and other investors holding the remainder. And in the agreement, there was a provision for paying an additional 88 million to increase the stake to 67%. Now this, therefore, we have an initial investment in one part of the port, moving to shareholding, and then expanding to tourism, from cargo to tourism. The idea being to turn this, through a very heavy investment, into a major cruise hub and transshipment logistics center for travel and trade to Southeast Europe. Now, the new focus on tourism reflects, of course, the rising demand from Chinese travelers to Greece. If I were to find a turning point here, it is the succession of the Athens and Beijing Olympic Games, which kind of turned a lot of interest from China to Greece and increased the ties and the tourist movement. China now has direct flights from Beijing to Athens. COSCO Shipping has signed an agreement with China Eastern Airlines for charter flights. So it is clear that we've gone from cargo to tourism, and now we're moving from transport and tourism to other areas, the main one being energy. In 2016, the China State Grid Corporation, which is the world's largest utility, purchased a minority stake in Greece's power grid operator. Now, this was again part of the privatization strategy of the country, and it's interesting from a governance point of view to see Chinese companies now being part of privatization programs in Southern Europe program countries. And you need to see this in a broader context, because in addition to this particular investment, you have the China State Grid Corporation buying 25% of the state grid in Portugal, 35% in Rete in Italy in 2017, if the figures are correct, and in Spain bidding for the EON's northern grid. So what you have is establishing a regional electricity grid portfolio in the EU. And that should be seen next to the port portfolio, which is being established with a number of ports across the Mediterranean basin. And of course, trade follows these kind of investments. The total although it's still not very large for Greece, it's about 3 billion. Obviously, the trade balance is heavily tilted in favor of China. So it's a growing portfolio. As I said before, China is unique in that it had the financial capacity, the risk appetite, and a long-term investment strategy. It has established a credible track record with Greek political authorities and the business community. The initial kind of feeling each other out has turned into the understanding that this is a serious business partner. It is now in a first mover position. Everyone wants to see what a Chinese investor will do before deciding whether to enter any field in any projects, privatization or otherwise. It's clear now that the Paris investment acted as an anchor investment that attracted follow-up investments and lending, soft lending, and other activities. And you have a movement now beyond transport, tourism, and energy to real estate, insurance, banking, telecoms. It's not always easy. For example, as we speak, one of the 4 Greek systemic banks, the National Bank of Greece, is tendering out its insurance arm, which is the biggest in Greece. It failed. There was a bid which failed with a Greek-American bidder, and now the bid has been relaunched, and the only bidder is a Chinese bidder. And there is a discussion whether it should go through or not, with concerns because this is, from that particular company, this is the first investment outside China. And therefore, there are concerns about whether this is the right investment, the right bidder to accept. I won't go over this table, but this is, and I'm very grateful to Jens Bastian, who's written a very good report for the BRD, from which I drew a lot, and has compiled Chinese investments in Greece since 2009, the main ones. And as you can see, transport, port, container shipping, energy, electricity are most, and some of the more recent ones have moved into, and smaller ones have moved to other areas. Now, some concluding remarks to stay within the time and not have the moderator remind me. When we're looking at the investment in Greece, we can easily say it is multidimensional, it is cross-sectional, and it is certainly strategic. It combines with similar investment in other countries in both ports and energy. So one cannot see Greece in isolation, but need to see it in a broader context. It clearly has direct and indirect benefits for the Greek economy. Remember, China came in when nobody else would. And therefore, China's investment were welcomed. And it's interesting, for example, if you look at energy, the State Grid Corporation is very happily bidding for various projects around Europe when European energy companies are very unwilling to go transborder. So what does one expect? If European energy companies are not willing to invest in the European connectivity, somebody else will. Now, that's on the plus side. How about the concerns? Françoise talked a bit about some of these concerns. There is a question about what happens when a particular country has strategic control over a number of your infrastructure assets. And there's a concern whether this in one country or whether this builds a portfolio of assets in a broader area. This is the conversation we need to have, because it's clearly, and we are starting to have, because it's clearly in the interest of the individual countries, and it could be in the interest of the whole, but within a framework that we need to set. And we need to set it collectively, and in that sense, I am disturbed by the fact that the EU does not have a position on the BRI and does not discuss this as a joint issue that we need to have a response over. And at the end of the day, it goes back to global governance rules. And the questions that we still have in a very volatile trade and investment environment about what rules China wants to play by. And until we have clarity on that, and clarity goes beyond investment rules, it also goes, for example, on whether China wants to be a part of the Paris Club or not. It goes to what happens when investments fail in Africa and what will be the role of the international multilateral institutions such as the IMF in that. Those are issues that cannot be left aside when we discuss individual Belt and Road initiatives, important and interesting as they are. And I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. I think it was very important to remind us that some of the Belt and Road projects are quite successful, in particular in some parts of Europe, which explains why, if you read one day the connectivity strategy put forward by the European Union, is actually a kind of like a diplomatic exercise in finding an equilibrium between some of the member states and lobbyists that would like to promote and to be more connected with the Belt and Road Initiative, and those that have more critical views. You also have a good point. We do not yet have a clear strategy. What the European Union issued a couple of weeks ago are guidelines, and of course it depends on member states, and that's why it was so interesting to listen to how different member states react. You mentioned the Greek economy largely benefited, but then if we had to talk with some German or some like French people, they may have a different opinion. So this is only the first part of this of the session. Try to understand what the Belt and Road is and what are the implications, good or bad, for the European Union. We will be followed by a second session, but after the coffee break. So please come back in 20 minutes for the second part of this Belt and Road Initiative and Europe. Thank you.